Welcome back, welcome back. The last few years have seen a number of PR setbacks for the United States with the fallout of Abu Ghraib, Guantanamo Bay, and the ongoing wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. A recent survey in the US concluded that the US image remains pretty abysmal in most Muslim countries in the Middle East and in Asia, and continues to decline among America's oldest allies as well. So why? Why is the US so unpopular at the moment? And what can it do to do something about it? I'm joined now, delighted to be joined now, by Colleen Graffy, the US Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Diplomacy. Well, good to see you, Colleen,
good to
again.
See you.
There is obviously an image problem, but I was in the States this week and people are bewildered and worried by it and so on. What do you think can be done about it?
Well, I think there's two things that can be done. Number one is we need to get out on the media more. We've tended to be focused on print journalism rather than where people are actually getting their news, which is on television. And we need to be communicating, for example, that Islam is a part of America. Many people don't realize that. They don't realize the respect for the religion that we have in the United States. That iftar dinners are held from the president to the secretary to cabinet members, that prayers are said at the iftar dinners. People have a very different view of America's approach towards Islam. So that's one thing we can do, is to get out and communicate that. The other is to communicate person to person, because the most effective way of communicating is not through television, it's one-to-one. So we have, for example, started English programs in over 40 Muslim-majority countries. We have started basketball clinics, bringing the First Lady is in the Middle East with a breast cancer initiative, something very important to women, but something that has traditionally not been spoken of in the Middle East. So how can we branch out in different ways communicating to people?
I see. So that's the challenge, isn't it? There are probably Guantanamo Bay. The sooner that's closed, the better for America and the people who are in there. But above all for America, that's been with Abu Ghraib. Those have been the two that have really crystallized this feeling.
Yes, and that's why the president has said we want to close down Guantanamo, and said that very clearly, but has also expressed the concern that we have to deal with this in a way that is returning people to a country where they'll be taken care of, and that we're also not letting dangerous people loose to perhaps commit atrocities in societies. And what we're finding is that every country is struggling with this. How do you protect civil liberties on the one hand, but also to protect society on the other hand? And moving beyond that, how do we work against extremism? We're so wonderful that we have more and more Muslim voices who are speaking out against extremists and who are communicating the fact that Al-Qaeda and associates are not part of Islam. And that is, I think, most welcome, because we're working all together to root out extremism.
And Iraq hasn't helped, obviously. There was a reasonable amount of support for going in the first place. You know, not everybody was in favor of it, but I mean, people understood it.
Sure.
They don't understand what's happened since, really.
Well, I think what we're seeing now, and it's too early to tell, but it looks like the surge is working. We're seeing this Sunni awakening, where there is a realization that Iraq is a democratically elected country, that they are fighting for their freedoms, that they are fighting for democracy, and that they are rooting out Al-Qaeda. And the latest is apparently Al-Qaeda in Iraq has been eliminated or suppressed in Baghdad itself. So we have to think, do we want a failed state in Iraq? No, we don't. We want success in Iraq. So now, despite all the past, we need to focus on helping Iraq to be a successful country.
Yes, I mean, the aftermath has been tougher than anyone thought. I mean, the mission accomplished seemed as though that might be true at the time, at the moment of the end of the hostilities, but then since then, the problem happens.
Yes, and now we see that the surge is having an impact. We see the fatalities, and we regret each and every one of those, but we do see a reduction in the fatalities because we see more and more Iraqis joining to eradicate Al-Qaeda in Iraq. We had some 20,000 Iraqis joining the police force recently. And we just hope that things continue along that way in Iraq.
Because, in fact, it's pretty true, I think, to say that there was a problem of unpopularity, nothing to do with these issues and Abu Ghraib and so on, but there was always, in a sense, of the world having a sort of jealousy of the wealth of the United States. I mean, the great giant country. So there was that was always there, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think that people forget that Reagan, I was a student in Germany. When Reagan was president, Reagan was enormously unpopular. He was a B-rate actor, remember this? He was reading cue cards, and then, of course, upon his death, they reflected great communicator he was, bringing down the Berlin Wall. And I think sometimes a negative narrative takes hold, and right now that's taken hold of America. But we need to think...
And the president in particular.
And the president. But when we think about it, do we think that it's in the best interest of Britain? Is it the best interest in Europe? Is it the best interest for the world that America has a negative image? Because there's so much that has to be done in the world. Avian flu, HIV, AIDS, working multilaterally on Korea, working multilaterally on Iran. We need American partnership and leadership with the European Union, with countries throughout the world. The US can't do it alone. Europe can't do it alone. But in partnership together, we can really make a difference. And there's some serious global problems. So,
do you think a new president, when he or she comes in, Hillary Clinton or Rudolph Giuliani, can they make a difference?
It's not going to be just a matter of changing the leadership. I think that there needs to be a reflection in the global community. There might be a policy here that someone doesn't like, Iraq, for example, but to weigh alongside of that, well, do we like the policy that Bush has espoused, that there should be an independent and viable Palestinian state, democratically elected side by side with Israel? No, people don't want that policy changed. Would we want to change the policy of spending more money than has ever been spent in the history of mankind to eradicate HIV/AIDS in Africa? No, that's a good policy, keep that one. Or working multilaterally with countries. No, working multilaterally is great. So as we might not like one policy, we should also encourage people to think, what about all these other areas where America is working as a force for good in the world? Burma, for example, poverty reduction, climate change. We need American leadership, and so I think we need to be, rather than a knee-jerk negative reaction on America, consider America is a force for good. Let's work with the United States.
Colleen, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Our thanks to Colleen there, and do let us know whether you think, in fact, whether you agree with her that America's getting a bit of a raw deal, or whether it isn't. Do let us know. We'd love to hear from you. Brazil was this week awarded the 2014 Football World Cup. That was no great surprise because no other country was competing to host the finals. FIFA, the world body of football, also decided that in future there should be lots more competition, because from now on any country will be able to compete to host the World Cup as long as the two previous finals haven't been held in their region. So the fight for the 2018 competition is already hotting up, with bids likely from the US and from Russia, China, Australia, and indeed England. With me now is a man well used to the politics of world football, David Davies by name, the former executive director of the Football Association. Welcome, David.
Thank you, David.
Let's start with the decision, the Brazil decision. As we were saying, it wasn't exactly a surprise for the obvious reason that they were the only contender, but there were going to be other contenders, weren't there?
There was talk of a joint bid involving Argentina, perhaps at one stage. There was talk of Venezuela. But in the end, I think Brazil is so tied up with the history of the World Cup. Brazil is so regarded around the world as, the country that has dominated the World Cup actually for so many generations. And I think there'll be a terrific welcome for the fact that it's going to be in Brazil around the world.
Expensive to get to for people in the rest of the world, obviously, but they'll be happy to pay.
When they get there, some of us have been lucky enough to go to Brazil and share the fervour and the feeling that there is for football in places like the Maracanã in Rio and in Sao Paulo. And I think it'll be a wonderful World Cup.
But what about this thing whereby they're going to have to build 4 stadia. How much are they going to cost?
Hugely expensive, because the truth is that, as happened in Europe in the 1970s, the stadia in Brazil have declined in the facilities that they provide, and there's talk of 4 new stadia, a refurbishment of another 6 or 8. And yes, the figure, I heard the figure of $11 billion, and that was a conservative estimate, some people think.
Really, some people actually think that. But why would Brazil, as you say, the king of football, really, why would they have let their stadia get into this state?
Well, you'd have to ask them, but obviously the economy has been through very difficult times over a number of generations in Brazil, and the facilities that were terrific in the 1930s and the 1940s, and then in the 50s and 60s, started to decline, and they weren't put right. My own view, though, is that there is a determination in Brazil to make this a fantastic World Cup and to use it to refurbish the stadia.
And what about the decision, the other decision, which affects everybody, not just Brazil, which is to stop the process of, which is relatively young anyway, of rotation, and go back to it's up for grabs to anyone except in the region where it just was?
Well, rotation achieved its objective, Sepp Blatter's objective, which was to get a World Cup to Africa. 2010 is going to be in South Africa. It was clearly South America's turn in 2014. But, of course, the Brazil decision and the fact that it ended up as the only candidate, that actually is not what FIFA were looking for. They would have much preferred a proper competition. So now, by getting rid of rotation, they're going to get a battle royal for 2018 with the Russians and the Americans and probably the Chinese, a very strong bid, I suspect, from Australia, and then, of course, England.
And so that will transform the bidding process, obviously. Would there be favouritism? I mean, is the FIFA one of those bodies, where certain nations often club together? And
yes, that has certainly been the experience, that Europe voted as one, for example, for 2006 in favour of Germany and against England. The regions do tend to vote together. The representatives of each continent tend to vote together. Having said that, this is going to be a very, very fierce contest, a battle royal, as I describe it. And I think that, firstly, there's got to be a decision in Europe. I mean, if Russia goes for it, England goes for it. People have talked about Spain as well. People are talking about a joint bid involving Belgium and Holland and even Luxembourg. So there might have to be a primary of one sort or another to sort out which is going to be Europe's bid, or at least Europe's favoured bid, because even then the countries that lost within Europe, as far as Europe's support were concerned, might still go forward.
Last question. Who are you tipping?
Well, I'm bound to think that England might start off as favourites, just about. I happen to think that eventually it will come from England, Australia or Russia, but ultimately maybe England or Australia.
I'm backing Qatar. Anyway,
Absolutely.
That's all we've got time for this week, so do join me again in 7 days for more Frost Over the World.